Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to another viewer variance video. We have another long video today, as we have 3 more suggestions from a single viewer, so we'll see how long this runs. In case you're new to the channel, I'd like to say welcome. I'm Doodleman149, I'm your host, and I hope you end up liking this video. If you're new to this series in particular, my viewer variance videos take builds offered by my viewers and subscribers, and I try them out each in Core Domination, Ground War, and Warzone. I end up ranking them in each segment as I go, and each weapon will get a final rating at the end with my thoughts on how they perform and how they might be improved, if they do end up needing to be so. For any of you who are new here, or who just need a reminder, here is how I rate the builds I receive. It's not a strict pass or fail system, it's a tad bit different. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at this if you need to. The builds today were offered by a subscriber named Kacbor. I know you're all perfectly capable of reading, but here we've got a mid-range M4A1 build, a long-range MP7, which of course will probably still excel up close, and a slower AK-47 build that looks very familiar to me. I'm guessing I'll enjoy the MP7 the most out of the 3. I've gotten a number of M4 suggestions lately, so while the weapon is good, it's kinda going stale. And in terms of the AK, I'm just not a fan. I ain't no commie. But without further delay, let's get into the first build we have for today. For Kacbor's favorite M4A1 class, we have the Dominator. This build starts off in the muzzle section with the monolithic suppressor for boosted damage range as well as radar concealment. The Corvus custom marksman barrel is next used to boost damage range and bullet velocity while also cutting down on our vertical recoil, all while costing us mobility. The tac laser is the next attachment we use in order to boost ADS speed and aiming stability. Stippled grip tape follows that in order to boost sprint out speed and ADS speed. We then round this build off with the 60 round magazines for boosted ammo capacity at the cost of mobility. For our first perk, we'll use EOD to make hostile explosives less of an issue. For perk 2, we use Ghost to stay off the radar when an enemy UAV is up, as well as being invisible to heartbeat sensors. Battle Hardened is next so that we won't be affected nearly as long by stuns, flashes, and gas grenades. For a tactical, we use a stun grenade to doom our enemies, and for a lethal, we're going with Semtexes. Going into testing the Dominator in Core Domination, I felt I was going to have a very similar experience as to when I used the Rambo build from TZAV Gaming's second video. Check out a link to that down in the description below. This feeling mostly arose from the fact that the build is almost identical except for 2 attachments. It also didn't help that the first map I tested both these builds on was the Malastore Tank Factory. It turns out that the Dominator is a better overall build for the M4A1. Its movement speed isn't terribly hindered by the medium barrel and the extended mags, so it doesn't feel clunky. The ADS speed improvements from a couple attachments help to cut down on the downsides of the barrel. The recoil is also extremely manageable, but that's a given since this is still the M4 we're talking about. There didn't feel like there was a range where this build didn't work. I of course missed some distant shots, but as I had said in previous videos, I'm just not an M4 guy. It's not recoil that I'm used to. The stuns and Semtexes were just nice bonuses because I run those all the time anyway. EOD is alright. I'm just way too used to my quick fix perk, so I was pushing fights that I had no business getting into. Ghost used to be one of my regular perks, so it was nice to have that again. But Battle Hardened was a bit of a tricky one. I remember getting stunned one time and thinking, wow, that sure didn't last that long, and in that instance, I appreciated the perk. Unfortunately, that's the only time I can think about where I actually got hit with a tactical and didn't immediately die. I can certainly see its use, and I'm sure it'll come in handy with some plunder fights, but it almost felt unnecessary for my lobbies. For Core Domination, the Dominator is going to get a very high 8 out of 10. The closest comparison, again, that I had to compare the Dominator with was the Rambo build from TZAV's second video. Where the Rambo excelled in Ground War because of its anti-vehicle capabilities, as well as its ability to deal with large numbers of enemies, Dominator doesn't exactly offer as much when it comes to destroying vehicles. While this isn't a problem in Core Domination, Ground War can be very vehicle heavy at times. Luckily, there aren't really any vehicles to worry about here on Promenade, so the Dominator worked just fine. The suppressor allowed me to go on pretty stealthy flanks and break enemy battle lines, allowing for us to pull out a win. The extended mags and Ghost really helped me with this too. When it came to engaging enemies at the long side streets, the Corvus barrel came in handy for helping with recoil and boosting my damage range. All the while, the tack laser and the stippled grip helped speed up this build. Despite all these benefits, I really feel like this build could have benefited from at least a hollow sight attachment for fighting those longer range fights. The irons are fine with the Corvus barrel, but I wasn't doing super well at long ranges. Altogether though, this build is very solid. For Ground War, this build will receive a 7 out of 10. When it comes to taking the Dominator into Plunder, I was feeling pretty confident with it, as now I had used 3 different M4A1 builds. When Freaky and I initially landed in Lumber and started looting, I got attacked by one guy that I promptly melted. I think it was a combo of the tack laser and the stippled grip that helped me to be faster than my opponent and get a quick kill. The suppressor also seemed to throw him off his game since he didn't seem to be able to pinpoint my location as I was laying into him. Either that or he was just a scrub, but who knows. I never ran into a situation where Battle Hardened came in handy, and that was what I was afraid of with this class. For my experiences in Plunder, at least personally, Battle Hardened felt like a waste of a perk. Ghost was fine for dodging those UAVs, and EOD is always solid there, but I felt like a better perk could have been used in slot 3. There were also a couple times I tried using my heartbeat sensor only for me to prime a stun grenade, as my brain remembered that's what I was actually running on this class. That's all my error though, I can't fault the class for that. I do feel like a foregrip would have been a good substitute for the stippled grip, but that's just me. For Warzone and Plunder, this build gets a 6 out of 10. Kacbor's MP7 build, strangely named Recoilant, yes, exactly how you'd expect it to be spelled, is a close-range beast. We start off with the monolithic suppressor again to boost our damage range and keep us stealthy. The FSS Recon barrel, the MP7's long barrel, boosts our range and recoil control at the cost of mobility. The tack laser is used again for very snappy aim and stability. Stippled grip tape is then used to boost our sprint out speed and ADS speed even further. To round this build off, we have the Commando foregrip to keep our recoil vertical while sacrificing movement speed. All 3 of these builds have the same perks and equipment, so I'll just skim over them again, briefly. We have EOD, Ghost, Battle Hardened, Stun Grenades, and a Semtex. I finally completed a challenge line that I had been working on for a while. As a result, I got the Corinthian blueprint and was able to make this cool looking MP7 build. This build feels like a standard long-range MP7 build, and that's basically what it is. But that isn't a bad thing. The monolithic suppressor and the long barrel both extend the weapon's range to its max. Combining the barrel and the Commando foregrip makes this low recoil weapon even more accurate. If there's anything on this build that isn't really needed, it's probably the tack laser. The ADS speed on this build, even with the long barrel and the suppressor, isn't too bad. Personally, I'd probably opt for either sleight of hand or a 5mW laser, but that's just me. This build is fast, supremely accurate, and has a great rate of fire. It's great at all and any range, really, because the recoil is so manageable, although if you do push the range on this weapon, remember that this is still a lower damage SMG, so don't expect miracles. My opinions on the perks and equipment remain the same, since all these builds share the same kit, essentially. For Core Domination, I'm going to give Recoilant another 8 out of 10. Typically, I don't praise SMGs in Ground War too much. The ranges are typically longer than optimal, and extended mags would hamper the mobility of these speedy weapons, making crossing open space more of a risk. However, I really couldn't find anything that stopped me from using Recoilant in Ground War. The recoil on this build is so easily controllable that I was even able to take out a sniper rather easily at long range with this build. Sure, the Commando foregrip and the Recon barrel both hamper the speed of this build, but the MP7 is compact and fast enough as it is that this was rarely a problem for me. Speaking of that long barrel, that, combined with the monolithic suppressor, really helped me at range by keeping my damage higher for longer. The tack laser and stipple grip tape also help balance out some of the downsides of the long barrel. This overall makes for a very well-rounded build. While this build still suffers because of range, it's not nearly as rough to use as you might expect. For Ground War, this build will earn itself a 7 out of 10. I was truly surprised by how the recoilant worked in Plunder. When collecting this footage, I had maybe 8 minutes before I had to get ready for work one morning, and I dropped 10 kills with a random, who himself dropped 4. I was running this MP7 as a primary with all the perks, and I was honestly kicking ass with it. At all ranges, except for when I tried to shoot at a sniper in downtown from the hospital roof, I was lasering enemies and melting them. This build just feels awesome. The longer barrel and Commando foregrip meet that sweet spot in terms of recoil reduction. The tack laser and stipple grip tape probably saved my skin a few times up close, and the monolithic suppressor boosted my range and kept me stealthy. I felt nigh unstoppable with this build, and we were on a fast track to first place when my alarm went off and I had to leave the match. This may honestly change the way I have some of my classes built for Warzone. If there is any change I would even dare to suggest, it would be an extended mag over the stipple grip probably. As is though, this gun is a monster. In terms of kit, I kept forgetting I had stuns so I never used them. I got 1 Semtex kill, and I was only ever harassed by stuns in the lobby, where I was able to shake it off quickly and murder the potatoes who dared throw them my way. For Warzone, Recoilant earns itself my highest rating yet, a 9 out of 10. For an AK-47 build similar to the ones I presented a while ago in my AK video, we have the West Destroyer. We start off with the unique Romanian barrel, which boosts range and recoil control, and comes with a built-in foregrip. The tack laser is again used for that ADS and stability boost. The skeleton stock boosts ADS and strafe speed at the cost of aiming stability. Stipple grip tape is again used to boost sprint to fire speed, as well as provide further ADS speed boosts. And lastly, we round this build off with the 545x39 rounds to boost recoil control and our rate of fire at the cost of range and damage. Just as before, all 3 of these builds have the same perks and equipment, so I'll just skim over them yet again. We have EOD, Ghost, Battle Hardened, Stun Grenades, and a Schmemtex. West Destroyer is extremely similar to my RPK build that I mentioned before. The Romanian barrel is arguably the best barrel for the AK-47, since it boosts damage range and heavily reduces recoil with that built-in foregrip. The tack laser helps to mitigate the downsides of that super heavy barrel, at least in the ADS department. The skeleton stock does a good job of this as well as adding boosted strafe speed. The Romanian barrel does reduce your movement speed by quite a bit. But once you know this and play accordingly, as in not rushing with this weapon, you can play just fine with this build. The combo of the 545 rounds in the Romanian barrel are a nice idea that I hadn't thought of. Use the most recoil reducing barrel available and combine it with an ammo conversion that has lower recoil anyway, and you've got yourself a Russian laser beam right there. I'm not a huge fan of the AK still. Its irons aren't that great, but I think the heavy barrel has better irons than the base at least. EOD and Battle Hardened work well with this build since it's a slower AK, meaning that you won't always be able to dodge those explosives thrown your way. For Core Domination, the West Destroyer gets a 7 out of 10. West Destroyer is actually a good build for Ground War. The Romanian barrel is an excellent choice for longer range engagements, and the ammo conversion, something I've come to appreciate more and more with these builds, keeps recoil extremely low. Even with the extreme slowness of the Romanian barrel, the tack laser, skeleton stock, and stipple grip tape all work to basically make the ADS penalty from that negligible. This means that this is probably the build's best game mode. It's got enough range, recoil control, and speed to be effective at all ranges, even against those PC players I run into. EOD is great here as well, since more people means more explosive spam. Ghost is less of a boon with this build simply because this AK isn't suppressed, but it's still nice for avoiding UAVs. For Ground War, West Destroyer receives a 7 out of 10. West Destroyer seems to perform very similarly to TZAV's AK-47 when it comes to Warzone, with a couple of differences. The Romanian barrel, again, is a great attachment for those typically longer ranged fights because of the extra recoil control and range boosts. All the speed attachments, the ammo conversion included, all more than make up for the slowness of the barrel. Essentially, what you have is a laser beam of a weapon. Now, while I do remember that these builds were listed as Kacbor's favorite multiplayer builds, an easy way to convert these builds to something better for Warzone use may simply be swapping the stipple grip tape for a suppressor. Other than that, Semtex is still my favorite lethal to use in Warzone, and the stuns are a good change of pace for me there, but I still barely use them. Aside from Battle Hardened, the perks are also great choices for this class. For Warzone and Plunder, the West Destroyer receives a 7 out of 10. And that about does it for my coverage of these builds, courtesy of Kacbor. Now, I know you all want to hear my final verdicts on these builds, so I'm just going to go through these as fast as possible. Dominator is a great overall build. Its ADS speed is acceptable given the stealth, range, and recoil control boost offered by this build, as well as the extended mags. This allows for snappier gameplay, which is most effective in Core Domination. The range and extended mags, as well as the suppressor, lend themselves well to dealing with multiple foes in ground war, although this build overall lacks any real anti-vehicle capabilities. In Warzone, this build works just fine, given it's suppressed and has the aforementioned extended mags. I'm just not personally very comfortable with the M4 in Warzone, despite it being an obvious meta weapon. Overall, I'm going to give the Dominator M4A1 build an 8 out of 10. When it comes to recoiling, despite the goofy name, this build was honestly the gem amongst the bunch. It excels in all 3 game modes, and, despite being an SMG, works very well at range. Core Domination gives this build a chance to flex its great mobility and snappy killing power. Ground War allows for you to really stretch out the range of this weapon while also being fast enough to cover open ground fairly safely. And in Warzone, I was so pleasantly surprised by how effortlessly I melted enemies and racked up kills. Again, in 8 minutes, I had 10 kills in Plunder. Overall, Recoilant gets a 9 out of 10 from me. West Destroyer is kind of a funny build for me. It works well enough in all 3 game modes. It's fast enough for most areas of Core Domination. It has enough range for ground war along with great recoil control properties. And for Warzone, the West Destroyer could only be improved by adding a suppressor instead of the stippled grip tape. While getting 7s across the board may seem like this build is average everywhere, I'd actually recommend using it everywhere because it's good everywhere. I'm not an AK fan personally, but even I could see the value of this build every time I used it. In summary, West Destroyer gets a 7 out of 10. And that's all she wrote. I really enjoyed making this episode of Viewer Variants, since I was uniquely surprised by the Mp7 build and have, so far, given it my highest rating yet. Dominator and West Destroyer are also extremely solid builds, so don't discount them simply because I'm not raving about them. With Dominator, it may simply be weapon fatigue, as I'm not a huge fan of the M4A1 in general, and I've had 3 builds for that gun alone relatively close together. That didn't skew my view of this build at all, it just explains why I'm not so hyped for it. West Destroyer gave me fond memories of my RPK build from a while ago, and I really like the ammo conversion for the AK now. It has many benefits that I always kinda overlooked because I didn't want to sacrifice the AK's power. This is honestly exactly what I want from this series. I want to see different builds that challenge how I might think about a given weapon. I hate the Grau, so maybe someone will give me a build that's new and innovative and not merely derivative. The class kit was fine since I run stuns and Semtexes anyway. EOD is a fine choice, but I still do prefer my quick fix. Ghost is a solid perk, but Battle Hardened almost felt like it was a waste more often than not. I never really got stunned while using it, so it felt unnecessary. However, when I did get hit, I immediately saw the difference, and it's one of those perks that doesn't seem useful until you really need it. So I thank you all for sticking around this long. These 3 weapon videos can be quite lengthy, so I thank you for your time and for appreciating the time I put into testing these and getting my thoughts on them. As always, if you liked what you saw and heard, show the channel some love in any way possible. Also, I truly hope you are all having a good day. If you aren't, don't be scared to reach out to someone. There's someone in this world who wants to see you succeed and be happy. If you can't think of anyone, then know that at least I personally want that for you. You've all been awesome. I've been your host, Doodleman149. I look forward to our next encounter, and I will see you later.